All right. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. We're so happy to have you all here for our second NetImpact guest speaker session. Today we have Gabriel Maldanado hosting a community discussion with everybody. Gabriel is the founder and CEO of True Evolution, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to preserving and fighting for the rights of the LGBT community, as well as the eradication of HIV and AIDS in the United States. Gabriel sits on the board of advisors and board of directors of several different health organizations, and most notably, he is on the President's Advisory Council on HIV and AIDS at the White House. He is here to talk to us about how to create an innovative enterprise, how to create sustainability and scalability within that, and what it means to really do that while staying true to your mission and your vision. And he would definitely want to hear from all of you. So please, this is not a lecture, this is a discussion. So we encourage your questions, your feedback. He would like to hear from you about what it is you want to do, what your interests are, and the impact you want to make on your community. So with that, I am going to turn things over to Gabriel and slide over for him.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm very, very excited for this discussion. Like Claire said, my name is Gabriel Maldanado. I am the executive director of True Evolution. I founded the organization in 2007, so I'm so excited because next year we will be celebrating 10 years. And it's just really remarkable how when you have those moments of reflection in all of our careers, whether we have nonprofit organizations or whether we work for other organizations or we work in other types of institutions, the reflection and looking back the journey and progress that we've made in our pursuits of social justice and social impact and trying to bring about some sort of community change. I think what's even more profound for me is seeing how the change that I have attempted to make in my community and in my field, how really so much of that work has changed me, right? And how I've grown and how I've developed as an individual. I started working in community work when I was 16 years old. I grew up in Los Angeles. I'm from Compton. I grew up to a single mother. I'm African American and I'm Latino. So I have growing up, it was a very polarized lived experience, particularly in Los Angeles in the early 2000s and late 1990s when there was a lot of racial tension and violence in Los Angeles between African Americans and Latinos, a lot of gang violence, particularly in my neighborhood in Compton, which was very much a segregated neighborhood. It wasn't like an all Black or all Latino neighborhood. It was definitely a mixed community. So there were a lot of racial tensions that existed not only within my community, but also within my school, within the workplace setting. And so I started doing this work as a community organizer. And I worked with the Los Angeles Police Department at the time. And it was my first taste in really seeing how culture, how our own upbringing, how our own biases, and how our own passions can very much inform our relationships within our community. And I was very intrigued by that, particularly as being a biracial child, teenager myself. I was curious in understanding how is that conflict existing within myself, right? Like how is the conflict within my own cultural and socio-cultural identity and upbringing? How is that in conflict? And I find that to be interesting. I mean, I think if we all take a moment real quick and we think about the reasons that we all got into this field, right? And when I say this field, I'm talking about the broad field of social and community impact, why we all got into it. And I would dare to say, like myself, many of us did not begin on this journey because we wanted to change the world. And, you know, we had these very grand and lofty ideas of being radical activists or, somehow being famous or on the cover of Times Magazine. I don't think that was our goal when we first began this work. Most often it begins because there's something about us that we are curious about. There's something about our own lived experience, something about our own interactions with society, our own interactions with culture and community, sometimes positive and inspiring, but also sometimes traumatizing and disappointing. And those things is what influences, it propels, and really it is an internal sustainability mechanism that we call upon and we draw upon every time we need strength in this work. And for those of you who do not work in a nonprofit, you need that strength. Trust me. Okay, because we are underpaid sometimes, and it is very exhausting because we do work that is sometimes at the same magnitude of Fortune 500 companies. But the idea of us getting paid anywhere in that same scope is, the audacity that we would actually get compensated our worth, right? So that's a whole other topic we can talk about later. I grew up and I had a very tumultuous childhood. And I experienced an enormous amount of bullying as a child. As you all see, I am thin-framed, lovely and beautifully thin-framed, but it's not so lovely and beautiful when you're a 14-year-old boy trying to play basketball with friends or trying to, look like the coolest, toughest kid on the school campus. And at a very early age, I developed a sense of compassion and an empathy for other misfits or those who did not fit into the socially defined structure of what acceptable should be like. Oprah calls that a whisper, right? She calls that the whisper. That was my first whisper, is that I knew that somehow my own lived experience was going to be the genesis and is the genesis and would be the propulsion for my life. I didn't know and I couldn't articulate that so eloquently, and I couldn't, define that as I can define it today, looking back almost 13 years in reflection. I couldn't define it that way, but there was something in me that knew that what I am going through and what I was going through growing up in Compton to a single mother, not really knowing my father at an early age, and really having this aggressive high school experience that resulted in me frankly trying to take my life at 13 and then again at 17 years old. And even throughout all of that, there were whispers. There was whispers that kept telling me, hold on, there is a reason. Hold on, there is a reason. Hold on, there is a reason. And I went to college in 2007. I graduated from high school and I moved out of my parents' house 3 months later. I wasted absolutely no time to leave Compton. And I came here to Riverside, here in the Inland Empire, where we are now. And I went to UC Riverside. And I actually got accepted to other institutions. And if I could be frank and candid, I chose UC Riverside simply because it was the most diverse university I got into. And I figured, I don't want to go to a monolithic institution in which there are going to be people who either have no lived experience that parallels or resembles mine, or has every lived experience that looks like mine. I don't want that, I wanted to go to an institution where I was going to be challenged with a diverse set of lived experiences and perspectives and opinions and thoughts. And I thought, well, maybe if everyone's different, then no one will notice that I am different. No one will notice that I am black and brown and that later I would come out as being gay. No one would notice that I am 130 pounds and have been 130 pounds for like 7 years now, and there's nothing anybody can do to take me beyond 130 pounds. Like that I am me, right? And maybe if everyone was different, no one would notice that I was different. So I came to UC Riverside, and it was the best decision I ever made. And I made my first group of friends. I never really had any friends growing up. And I made my first group of friends. And I will say their names because their names are actually very important in this conversation of developing nonprofits. It's Katrina Sakaue, Stacy Hartnett, Erica Marquez, Gabriella Dantas, and Amanda Ann Robinson. Why do I tell you their names? Because that was my founding board of directors of my organization in 2007 when I was 18 years old. And today, 10 years later, all of those ladies now in some capacity work in the social impact sector. in various different forms. Some of them, Stacey Hartnett now works in Skid Row in Los Angeles, and Erica Marquez is a special education teacher for low-income youth in Los Angeles. Katrina Sakaue does recreational sports for kids and youth at park programs. And they're just amazing, beautiful women. And they began my organization together. We all formulated under this idea of creating a vehicle for young people to realize their dreams, their passions, their selves, their purpose through education. We believe that education, like it did for all of us, was the gateway. It was the opening door to insight and thinking and intellectual understanding. It was a moment of consciousness. You know, the small, brief years that we spend in education, they're just moments, right? They go away very quickly. But those moments are used as awakenings and levels of consciousness that open us up to a deeper understanding of community, of ourselves, and how we as ourselves can make a difference in community. So 10 years, so a lot happened. And when I started to graduate, come to the end of UC Riverside, I knew I had to make a choice. I had done quite a lot in my undergrad. I had the opportunity to speak at several events and forums and conferences on LGBT social justice issues. I worked closely on the No on Prop 8 campaigns, marriage equality. I used to be one of the festival directors for San Diego Pride. So if anyone's familiar with the Pride festivals that happen around the country for the LGBT community, I first started working there in San Diego. And it was my first opportunity to be immersed into the LGBT queer culture and for me to have a deeper understanding of the LGBT community and really of myself, you know? And I think if I can drive home any point, it would be that all of my choices and my decisions, I confess, were selfishly made for me to better understand myself. And that just comes as a byproduct of being an 18-year-old executive director. Right? Is that I'm simultaneously trying to figure out who I am while I'm trying to figure out what it is I'm trying to accomplish in community. And you will find that in the development of your social impact projects that that's what happens. You learn about yourself and figure out who you are. And so, you know, my organization today, we are now in January, we will break $1 million. So that's a huge accomplishment for me. I feel very proud of that we took, we had a $185,000 budget in 2015. And the reason why it took me nearly 10 years to just even get a $185,000 budget, and this is where we can then maybe start diving a little bit into enterprise models. Well, as an 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24-year-old, I had no idea how to fundraise. And I had no idea that as we go, for those of you who don't currently do development or fundraising work, the days of like unlimited, unrestricted grant funding has ended. Like those days are over. Those are the happy years, right? Those were the golden years where you could get a, $500,000 5-year multi-year grant with very little outcome measurements, and your grant reporting requirements were like every 6 months, send us a 2-page report. That was it, right? Days are over. Those days are gone. Now everything is highly data-driven. It's highly outcome-driven. And really what a lot of funders and foundations are looking for is they want to see tangible deliverables of how I can visually see that you have changed or moved community. How have you physically changed it? How can I look and see a piece of paper in which this legislation has now been written, passed, and proven through legislation at the state, local, or federal level? How can I see that this community center is now erected? But okay, now that the community center is erected, how many patients did you have? And how are you measuring that the quality of life of those patients have now moved in a more positive health outcome direction, right? It's very, very, very data-driven now. And I didn't know that. So what did I do? I went back for my MBA, right? And also because I was terrified of the professional outcomes personally for me, like what kind of salary I can make, how is this going to help my own personal quality of living. So I said, this MBA is my golden parachute. If I need to jump out of this sector, I can go work in finance and call it a day. So I went and did my MBA at the University of Redlands. And that's where I met Claire Baca, who at the time was my advisor. And so you guys are very fortunate and blessed to now have her. She's amazing and passionate for her students. And I can personally say that I would not have graduated if it wasn't for Claire. And that is an honest statement. I would not have graduated. I would have left the program. So she got me through it. And that's another thing that you'll find is that as you're developing your nonprofit organizations, community stakeholders and the types of stakeholders that you bring into your enterprise come in all different shapes and sizes. And they come in ways that are conventional and not so conventional. You know, at one moment, Claire is my advisor, and next minute she is offering me a platform to speak to individuals like yourself, in which we are now going to be on a journey of building a relationship, not only with myself, with Lincoln Claremont University, but also with ULA students, that we now have this relationship. And you have to always be conscious, especially as leaders in your enterprises, that you are always on the lookout for stakeholders. You are always on the lookout for how you can build relationships. And if I can give you some concrete bullet points for how you can develop more of a robust and sustainable enterprise model, I kind of break it down into three basic categories. And really, this is not coming from an academic perspective. This is really just 10 years of experience. That's all it is. One is creating a stakeholder base within your community, right? So those who are micro donors who maybe make, $10 monthly pledges, or literally people who just make a one-time $100 donation because they came to an event of yours, or because they're a friend of yours and they believe in your project, right? So community, right? Community at large. The second thing is through, professional relationships. One of the things that I have the privilege and the honor and the skill set of having built is I've amassed a really great database of working professionals, high-ranking individuals, and leaders that work specifically in my field. These are people who run foundations. These are elected officials. These are legislators. These are CEOs of corporations. These are administrative and finance directors for, companies. These are vice chancellors for academic institutions. All of these people are ranking professionals in your field. And it's very important that you cultivate those relationships, because I found that even if they aren't the people who write the check, they have influence with the people who write the checks. And sometimes those individuals are more powerful than the people who write the checks. Okay? Influencers. Yes. Question from Anita. Or comment.
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you great.
Okay. So, boy, you're giving us a lot of great information. So let me pick up, though, from what you just said.
Yeah.
Someone in the community in LA told me, when I was asking him what kind of elective course could we offer in the social impact program, and he said that he has found that young entrepreneurs, or even established entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs, do not understand their ecosystem. Mm-hmm. They do not know even how to go about that.
Right.
How did you learn?
Man, I think your question actually hit the nail on the head why it took me 10 years to get $185,000 in 2015, right? I didn't know my own community. I didn't know how things worked. I'm going to give you an example. I serve on this is the perfect example. I serve on the President's Advisory Council for HIV and AIDS. And let me specifically tell you how it works. When you hear the word Presidential Advisory Council, your immediate thought is, I was appointed by the president himself, mm-hmm. and that when I have my meetings, I go to the White House, right? That would be an immediate assumption you would make. That's inaccurate. That's not how the structure functions. I'm actually an appointed official of Secretary Bruel, who's the Secretary of Health and Human Services. And most of my meetings are actually in the Secretary of Health's building, right? A lot of times we've had individuals that have approached the council because they wanted to get appointed, and they approached the White House. Mm. But the White House says, we don't make those appointments. That appointment comes from the Secretary of Health. But that is an example of someone doesn't understand the ecology. They don't understand the mechanisms for what they're trying to accomplish. So before you step into your field, before you step into your work, you need to, one, Google. That's where I began. Google. How do departments work? You know, what agencies report to who? Who oversees what? How do funding mechanisms work? When you're approaching foundations, the same exact thing. If you, let's say you work in, so earlier, actually, here's a great example. So earlier I heard Christopher, can you just tell us a little bit more, a little recap for the group about the capstone that you're working on, please?
Yeah, so my capstone project is with a local United Church of Christ congregation, and they are open and affirming, which is a stance that from the denomination that says that they've made a public welcome to the LGBTQ community, and I'm working with the stakeholder group there to move from being just merely welcoming once someone walks through the doors to being intentionally invitational to the community, meaning we provide mission services outside of our doors and outside of our Sunday morning services.
Thank you. Excellent. So, you know, the first thing that popped into my head was that if Chris was designing a nonprofit organization around this and he needed funding, there were 3 funding streams that immediately popped into my head. And all 3 of them you would think are related, but are actually completely unrelated. So the first one would be like the Liberty Hill Foundation, right? So though Liberty Hill Foundation, I've never heard of them funding anything to do with the faith-based community, right? I've never heard of them doing any work with the church or anything like that. However, they're really big on engaging LGBT, specifically LGBT youth, and having access to spaces that they've traditionally not had fully acceptance and acceptance into, right? So if I was writing the grant, I would say, Chris, you should write to the Liberty Hill Foundation. Maybe keep the fact that you're working with the faith-based institution, keep that as a secondary line, right? That should be kind of the secondary objective, right? But really the primary objective is to create better access for the LGBT community to be given opportunity to go into spaces that they traditionally or historically have not had great access into, right? So that could be the bulk of your grant, is that you're talking about LGBT rights. You're having a context about maybe bullying or suicide. You're tying in some kind of health outcome directive to that, right? So that would be the Liberty Hill approach. But that's understanding how Liberty Hill functions, how they think, what their objectives are. That doesn't mean you're changing your mission. That doesn't mean you're watering down what you're doing. You're just selling the particular perspective of your initiative to meet the goals of the foundation to which they have their own funding priorities. The second one would be the Open Society Foundation, which is huge, right? And I would think the Open Society Foundation, definitely they have a portfolio that does engage in certain aspects of the faith-based community. They're a little bit more about like civic engagement and like creating real policy changes, but there is a way that I could sell that too when it comes to interacting with the faith-based community. That may be more where we might bolster and emphasize the impact of creating like a widespread policy reform, right? Let's say we're doing widespread policy reform of a particular national church. And you could say that you guys contributed to a new policy amendment on how they approach the LGBT community to being more invitational, as you put it, right? And the third thing, and here's one that goes way outside the box, is the AIDS Healthcare Foundation. Now, I sit on the board of directors for the AIDS Healthcare Foundation. For anyone who doesn't know, AIDS Healthcare Foundation, AHF, is the largest HIV/AIDS organization in the world. They're in 36 different countries, in 18 different states. They have a little over 615,000 patients, and they have about $1.3 billion in revenue that they bring in every year through their health services and through their pharmacy program. Now, why would I bring them up? Like HIV and AIDS, what are you talking about? What does it have to do with anything that we just discussed? Well, within AIDS Healthcare Foundation, they actually have a working committee that talks about how do we use the church and faith-based communities to create open environmental spaces to those who are disproportionately impacted by HIV and AIDS. So for anyone who is unaware, gay men of color are disproportionately impacted by HIV/AIDS in the country of the United States. And also, if anyone is aware, gay men of color actually have very, very high rates, specifically because they come from an African-American background of having close relationships with the church, right? And there's a faith-based working group within AHF that funds initiatives on activities that creates open opportunities for the faith-based community and LGBT people of color to have better dialogue and relationships. So we might want to talk. I might be able to recommend you for a grant if you need something. So, you know, like understanding the ecosystems of not only your immediate environment, which is what Anita's question was originally at, your immediate environment, your community, your city, your locale, but also understanding your field. What is the ecosystem of your field, of what you do, and how far do the tentacles of what you do really reach? And I think everyone here would agree that all of this work that we do is intersectional, like everything. Like everything is intersectional. Like you could throw out any field that any of you work in. Danette, if you don't mind, can I hear a little bit about what you're working on or what your passions are?
Well, right now I've just ended the program, so I don't have a specific idea yet. I have many of them, but they are evolving. However, my passion is to make sure that people who are underrepresented in different areas are heard, that their voices are heard in the community, and specifically people of color and and even children who do not have parents or who have parents who have their own difficulties, to be able to be a voice for them. Among many ideas that I have.
I love that.
Good.
Thank you for sharing that. It's amazing. You know, and it's so interesting. I'll be honest with you, the way you just articulated that was exactly how I articulated it when I started my nonprofit. Like the key words that you use, I was like, oh my God, that's me. That's so me. Giving voice, underserved, right? People of color. Like those were also my passions. And I heard Elizabeth Gilbert once. She gave a lecture. And Elizabeth Gilbert, she's the author of Eat, Pray, Love, the movie. Some of you guys may have seen the movie. Some of you guys may have read the book. But she gives a lecture, and she talks a lot about following your purpose, or finding your purpose by following your passions. And she gave a follow-up lecture once and said, you know, I got a letter from someone who said, it disappointed me when you said to follow my passions, because I have none, right? And so I have none. So what am I supposed to do with that, right? And Elizabeth said, and it's something that you actually just said right now, she said, well, if you don't have a passion, follow your curiosity, you know? And Danette, that's exactly what you're doing. You know, you're still evolving. You know, my organization is called True Evolution. I named it for a reason, because I think that everything that we do in this field is constantly in a state of evolution. I had no idea 10 years ago that I would be opening up a clinic. That I would be, you know, like, I would be more so, I think in the country, I'm more so considered a public health practitioner than I am considered an LGBT activist, which is weird because I language myself as an LGBT activist, but most people probably consider me a public health practitioner or a health rights activist, which is very interesting. And it's an evolution that I didn't even foresee happening, but it did. And so what I would say, you know, to you is to just continue to follow your curiosities and allow it to just surrender yourself to going down the rabbit hole, right? And the rabbit hole will take you to beautiful places. And to circle back with what Anita said, she said, how do you discover your ecosystem? How do you learn your ecosystem? You let yourself fall down the rabbit hole. You know, you show up to conferences, you know, you might see a forum that piques your interest. So you say, you know, I'm gonna go check out this forum. It's only $25 to show up. Maybe I'll just show up, you know? Or you go to a cocktail reception. Now, secretly, I know this is being recorded. I hate that it's being recorded because I hate saying this. Most grants are made over cocktails. Now, I would not say that if I haven't been doing this for 10 years. I would say that is a jaded and biased statement, but that is an accurate statement. Most grants are made over cocktails. And I say that metaphorically. You said it. No, come over here. Just come over here and sit next to me. Right? Sit next to me. They're made through relationships. Is what she said. They're made through relationships. You know, it's not made because I did a PowerPoint presentation on my program. You know, my organization now has a a decent amount of funding to where we make grants. We give out funding. Now we give out micro grants. So we do anywhere between like $500 and $3,000 grants, right? Little seed grants for starter projects and stuff, specifically for high school kids. We try to create social entrepreneurship amongst high school students. So we give micro grants out. To be honest, your PowerPoint presentation is what you make to my board of directors. Okay, when I have to sell my end of the year report. So I want you to do the PowerPoint because I have to do an end of the year report, right, on how I spent the money. So you got to do that. That's a given. But I gave you the grant because you took me to your high school and we walked around in jeans and a t-shirt, and I saw how the group of LGBT kids gather in the classroom and they sit around talking about, their own identity and their upbringing and services that they need. And then after that, I took you out to coffee and we sat down in downtown Riverside, and I heard about your story growing up as a young queer boy in Riverside. That's why I gave you the grant. Not because your presentation looked nice, not because you had your finances worked out or your budget sheet looked clean. That is a given. That you should already have that. We shouldn't even be having a conversation about that. That should just be a given. But I gave you the grant because of your story. And I believed in you and I invested in you because of who you are, not necessarily because of what you can do. And if I can be honest with you guys, I'll let you in on something. I'm in the middle of writing my first op-ed. I've been asked over the years to write op-eds on myself and my journey, and I've never done it ever. I've turned it down from magazines and news articles, and LA Weekly asked me to write one. I said no. I've always been afraid of telling my story on paper. Something about being on paper made me afraid. And I opened up my op-ed the other day, starting to write it. And I said, I am beginning to come to the understanding that my power comes not because of what I have done, but it comes from who I am. And I think that's for all of us, that's something for all of us, is that your inspiration, your drive, your power, the sustainability of you, right? The sustainability of you. Because without you, there is no social impact. So your own sustainability comes from who you are, not necessarily from what you can do. And today, specifically what my organization is now trying to accomplish is, I'll talk a little bit about my work specifically and how it's informed through my work. So I operate at 3 levels. So I operate at the local, national, and global level. So locally, I run my nonprofit organization. And our ultimate goal is we're opening up a drop-in center. It's going to be the first LGBT drop-in center in Riverside County, and it opens October 1st. I'm so excited. And the reason why I took so long to open up the drop-in center is because I wanted, at the minimum, I wanted to know that I had 1 year's of full operating budget in the bank, 12 months. Most people say the rule of thumb is 6 months. I'll be honest with you, don't listen to that. It's 12 months. And let me tell you why it's 12 months. From the day that someone says that they're giving you a grant, that you got the award letter. So when people get the award letters, I don't post that on Facebook. I don't get excited and I don't tell nobody. Award letter, and forgive my language, doesn't mean shit, okay? Award letter don't mean shit, okay? Because things get rescinded, all that. But the time that the award letter comes to the time that money is in the bank can take about 6 to 7 months. So you got all excited that you just got a $200,000 grant and you go and open your center tomorrow. And there ain't no money there to pay no bills. So, one, you have 12 months worth of funding is really, really crucial. Anita. Can't hear you.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. You can
sorry.
finish that thought, and then I'd have a question.
Yeah. So, one is you have 12 months of operating budget. 2, I wanted to make sure that I had a workforce that was going to be able to stay around at minimum 3 to 5 years. One of the biggest issues that we have in the nonprofit sector is turnover. Turnover is one of the biggest issues in nonprofit at every level. I was actually just talking to a colleague who just got hired just a few years ago at a public health department that was failing. She turned it around overnight, and she just announced that she's leaving. She turned it around, and it's doing amazing now, but she's leaving. So turnover is really bad. So I wanted to ensure that I had a dedicated workforce that could be at least committed for a minimum of 3 to 5 years. So that was the second thing. And the third thing is that I wanted to ensure that the model that we had was sustainable beyond that 1 year of reserves that we had, that there was a pathway. Okay, I call it a pathway, that there is a pathway to sustainable multi-year funding. Now, unfortunately, my organization is still trying to figure out what an internal business model is that we can develop that goes beyond grants, like straight grant funding. So instead, what we have is we have a series of MOU. For anyone who doesn't know, that's a memorandum of understanding, MOU cooperative agreements between much larger nonprofit organizations, in which we are providing services for that nonprofit in exchange, not necessarily for money or dollars, but exchange for resources. So one example is, it looks like the facility that we're going to be opening up next year, we're going to be getting it at $1 per year, every year for 5 years. So although that is not hard cash in the bank, that's offsetting at minimum $100,000 to $200,000 in maintenance, rent, and overhead expenses for a brand new facility, right? Through an MOU cooperative agreement. So just to recap those 3 things, make sure you have 12 months of reserves for your initiatives, right? Whether it's a nonprofit or even if it's a non-nonprofit structure, even if it's just an advocacy project, that if you want some kind of sustainability, you want to have a minimum of 12 months reserves. The second thing is you want to have a workforce that can be dedicated for 3 to 5 years. And 3, you want to have some kind of mechanisms for sustainability, right? And that could either be a business model in which cash is coming in, or it could be through a series of MOU cooperative agreements in which in-kind services are exchanged that offset or mitigate very critical capital or fixed expenses that you may have. Anita.
So can you hear me okay? Mm-hmm. Okay. So one of the things that occurs with young up and coming organizations who are actually searching for support and funding is that they end up doing their evaluations and assessments of their progress based on what the grant might be asking. Mm-hmm. And so it's difficult to determine what are you evaluating? What are you looking for to prove that your organization is in fact doing what you say it should do? And keeping in mind when you answer that you have talked a lot about some grants, which every grant has another way of tracking its success. So why don't you talk a little bit about that if you don't mind?
Yeah. So every sector, okay, so let's start this way. Every sector in the different types of nonprofit or social justice or social impact environment have very different metrics for tracking success, right? I work in a big majority of my grants. Our largest private grant is through a health foundation, the Riverside Community Health Foundation, which is located in the city of Riverside here, about 30 minutes away. And the second one is we have a state contract that is administered through our local county. Both of those probably make up nearly 50% of our operating budget. Those are health-driven grants and funding sources. So for them, it's easier, but it's harder. It's almost easier, but harder. It's easier in the sense of how do you measure it? Because our measurements are directly tied to people's health outcomes, right? So we work, a large part of our grant is working in HIV and AIDS. So we look at things like viral suppression. So for anyone who doesn't know, when someone's HIV positive, they have viral loads, right? And the goal is to get their viral loads suppressed below, I think now the CDC standard is like below 40 copies per milliliter of blood, meaning that they're now virally suppressed and essentially they're non-infectious by up to 96, 98%. So that's the goal, right? Is to get everyone virally suppressed. So through our activities, like we do support groups. And so I can say, I do this support group because if people with HIV have social support and they feel confident about who they are A, more likely to go to their doctor's appointments, B, more likely to access their medication, C, most likely to stay adherent to their medication, which is a big problem in the country right now is people don't stay adherent. I mean, my dad has diabetes and he struggles with staying on his diabetes medication. You know what I mean? So it's not even just HIV. People just have trouble staying regimented to anything, right? So we measure our success through things like viral suppression, through how many times people go to their doctor's appointments. We also, my behavioral health specialist has a depression and anxiety scale where they measure how far this person's depression has gone down or how far this person's anxiety has gone down. That's health driven, okay? If anyone just heard recently, I know, Anita, you and I have had conversations about the Ford Foundation. Ford Foundation just committed to a $100 million endowment collective campaign pool with Black Lives Matter. Who thought? You and I was just talking about Black Lives Matter and Ford Foundation a couple of weeks ago. You know, we were just having that conversation. They just gave them $100 million, or they committed to a 6-year campaign to raise $100 million for them. The outcome measurements for them, I'm suspecting, are more likely going to be tied to actual deliverables of policy. So policy deliverables. So you actually formulated some kind of policy structure to reform the criminal justice system, or to help, provide tools to municipals to lower police brutality and to measure rates of police brutality. So every sector is going to be different. When it comes to grants, some funders are very progressive, and they're very, very much up on the times. Some foundations, especially the older ones, they use very old, little dated ways of measuring success. I will speak on behalf of the AIDS Healthcare Foundation as on its board, and how we look at the success of the grants that we award. To be honest with you, our grant reporting is very, very easy. It's very simple. Like, the paperwork is like no brainer, okay? What's hard is that we like pictures, videos, and testimonials. I want to hear from your community. I want you to rally up 100 people that you service, and I want to hear from them, that they actually feel that they can testify that their lives have changed because of the work that you've done. And that could be good or bad. That could be a good or bad thing, you know? So I hope that answers your question. I could go into each sector and get very, very detailed in each sector, but that's just in general different tools that I've used to measure our success.
Well, the reason that I ask you is because I know of several young organizations that reach out for just about any kind of grant and end up losing focus because they go after the grant to supply whatever it is they have been told to supply from the grant, which gets them off of the focus of their organization in the first place.
Right. So that's a challenge because in this day and age, a lot of people are just trying to survive. They're like, we just trying to keep the doors open and people's paychecks coming through. That's all we trying to do. And I just gave a whole bunch of my staff members raises. So you can just imagine the stress I feel now. I'm like, okay, now I got to triple what I just did. I got to do that times 2 or 3 next year. So you should start chasing grants. What I would say to that, though, there are some grants that are rigid. They're very like, this is the box you have to stay in. To be honest, you don't want to do yourself a disservice by going after those rigid grants just because it's there.
Yeah, that's right.
And let me tell you something else too. There is someone else out there who fits that.
That's right.
There is someone else who fits that. So while you're taking that grant, there's another nonprofit whose mission fits squarely in that grant.
Yeah.
What you need to do is go about the business of doing 2 things. One, developing that internal business model that we talked about, so that you have to look at what resources and tools and skill sets does your organization have to develop models that allows you to generate revenue outside of traditional grant applications. Okay, so that's number 1. And number 2, go after the foundations that have very broad funding categories. There's a lot. Like, you'll be surprised. Ford Foundation is one. They're actually pretty broad. Like, thank you so much. She probably sees that I am sweating. She's probably like, he is getting hot up in here because we're having a good conversation. So when I get excited and happy, I talk really fast and I get excited. But this is just because I get excited. I'm an executive director, so I sit and write grants all day. I don't get to talk to people as much. So this is a treat for me, right? And just know, if you want to be an executive director, that means you don't want to be in community. It means you want to be in an office writing grants all day long. Choose your job occupation carefully. But the Ford Foundation is definitely one of them. Open Society Foundation is definitely one of them. Soros is definitely one of them. AIDS Healthcare Foundation is definitely one of them. We are looking for innovative, new, creative, out-of-the-box projects in which you do not have to deviate from your core competency. Because what happens is, if you go off mission or if you deviate from your core competency, it's going to reflect in the outcome of your work. And people will be able to smell, they will smell your inauthenticity. And I'll be honest with you, one of the things that is such a privilege with being on the board of AIDS Healthcare Foundation is that as a board member, I get to travel around the country often, and I meet with community partners. So board members, we get involved. Like, we are hands on the grant, like we get to go out, meet community partners, tour your facility as individuals, and offer our own recommendations. And as a board member, when I'm giving a recommendation on possibly funding someone, I really don't want to see any of your written materials. I want to come and sit down and see your passion for this work. I want to see that this is mission driven. I want to see that this is within your core competency. And I want to see, how did your organization begin? And how is your evolution still in alignment with that beginning, with that genesis? I want to see how that has come along. And I'll be honest with you, a lot of funders that fund my organization, they are the same way. And one thing that a lot of my funders have told me, and I appreciate, is they say that I'm very consistent. That, like, throughout my years of hearing me speak and all the different work I've worked on, they're like, Gabe, you have the same speech you be saying, the same. And I said, it's because it's my passion. This is what I do. This is what we do. This is who we are. This is our identity. And it's very important that every organization, every entity, every initiative has an identity. It has meat and it has bones. It has eyes. It has mouths. It has ears. It has structure. It has mass. And funders are looking to see that. Anyone have any questions? Anyone want to just chime in?
I would like to chime in.
Yeah, please. Please.
My name is Stephanie. This has been very informational and inspirational. It's really wonderful work you're doing, and I really admire your enthusiasm. I mean, it's coming across the screen. It's just wonderful. I've been listening very carefully as to what you've been saying, and you talked about your drop-in hours, and I know you're focused on the HIV, it sounds like, and AIDS, but, it almost sounds like you're kind of, not that it's anything negative, but you're trying to be a little bit more holistic. I don't know if if I'm interpreting that, or okay.
No, I love it. Yay! I'm doing something right.
I picked that up from you, but I had a question because I thought this was so relevant. This is the Wisconsin Gazette, which is our alternative newspaper, and it came out just this week. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a very interesting article about 2.2 million LGBT people struggle to find adequate food. And I'm wondering if you're addressing anything, with the health, mentally, emotionally, and physically. I mean, that was a total surprise to me of they're not getting the proper food. There's misconceptions about them being affluent and not needing, food and nutrients and that. And I was wondering if that's an area you might be going into.
So I love that you said that, and you kind of warmed my heart saying that, because I didn't even say that, and that's really what we are. We are a holistic organization. Actually, specifically in the health services sector, most major grants and federal and state RFPs are calling for what's known as wraparound services. Meaning you got to do it all. You got to mental, you got to offer medical transportation, you better offer linkage to care into clinical treatment services, you need to offer food, and it has, because that's how you maximize retention into care and you maximize people's health outcomes, right?
Yes.
To answer your question, I'm going to give you a little moment of intersectionality here. So there are also about 2.1 million people in the United States living with HIV and AIDS. Okay. Those most disproportionately impacted by HIV and AIDS in the country are in the LGBT community. More so transgender women of color, gay and bisexual men of color. Okay. They make up a bulk of the new incidences. Okay. people cannot stay adherent to their HIV medication without proper diet and food. So there are some medications that require a certain calorie intake. So, I mean, there's what is it called? Not a tripla. I love always giving people real hard nuggets of facts they can walk away with. Is it a triplet? It's one of the medications, Complera, that's what it's called, Complera. Complera is an HIV medication that requires a certain amount of calorie intake, right?
Yes.
So, although the article you're talking about is discussing probably a broader food shortage or lack of quality food to LGBT at large, the work I'm doing, it very much intersects with that because food is required for HIV medication. LGBT people are disproportionately impacted by HIV and AIDS. Therefore, I need to have food programs that maximize quality food for LGBT people, right? And like there's so much overlap and correlation. And then we're funded now by Kaiser Permanente. And a lot of Kaiser, we just got a Kaiser grant. So a lot of Kaiser Permanente's grant recipients in this area, a large number of them, I'm not sure, what state are you in?
I'm in Wisconsin.
Oh, you're in Wisconsin. That's right. You just said that. Okay, Wisconsin. Here in Inland Empire, especially in Riverside County, we're an agriculture town. This is agriculture region here. So we make a lot of like fruits and vegetables here. So there's a lot of nonprofits and grassroots organizations that are in the food sustainability sector. There's a lot of them here. Farm growers, food, and they give food pantries out to people that can't afford quality, non-pesticide infested food. And a lot of them are funded by Kaiser. I met a few of them at a meeting one time. And so I'm thinking about doing a cooperative MOU agreement. Come on, people.
Okay.
Here's the teams. Cooperative MOU agreement where we can exchange services and maybe I can provide them a center that they can work out of that I get at $1 per year that they can operate out of if they give free food to my LGBT kids, right? Like so now I'm providing a service via an MOU cooperative agreement that costs me no money.
Yes. I think that's great.
See, and then now I can list that I provide that service that I don't administer, that I don't function, that I don't need to fundraise for, but I can still get credit for it because I brokered and facilitated this MOU cooperative partnership. So that allows me to apply for grants outside of a sector that I don't necessarily work in. And Anita and I had this conversation about grants and, getting the money and what happens. Yeah, I don't know anything about the food sector, okay? Nutrition's not my thing. I don't know. But because of this MOU agreement, I now can fundraise money, apply for grants that are completely outside of what I do, pass the money through to this other agency, and maybe just keep 15% for administrative costs. Mm-hmm. But I'm not straying from my core competency. I'm not changing what I do. My staff is not augmenting what we do, and I am not taking on any more staff. We simply created this relationship through almost like what do they call them? Like collectives? Or what do they call them?
Co-ops? Co-op?
There we go. A co-op, like a co-op agreement between several organizations. And honestly, that is the way of social impact. That is the future of social impact, is that there is this interconnectivity and an interdependency amongst social justice organizations through MOU agreements. And that allows us to do a few things. It allows us to reduce our overhead costs. It allows us to maintain our core competencies, but it allows us to create wraparound and expanded services at the same time.
I love it. I really like the synergy, and now I know a better word of saying holistic wraparound, because I just thought of what you're doing and how the individuals might have a compromised immune system, and they need healthy food, and how do you give this if you're not doing, partnerships and that. So I think that's just wonderful, really admirable.
Thank you. And I'll just disclose, I have no problem talking about it. I am also a person living with HIV. And I became HIV positive in 2013 after being sexually assaulted. And so, it was rough at the time.
Yes.
And so that's what sparked my passion for my organization becoming more holistic. Because when I worked in when I started working in HIV almost 8 years ago, I approached it from a very clinicalized public health standard perspective. But when I became a member of the HIV community myself, I needed some mental health. I needed therapy.
Yes. Yes.
And to speak to Chris's point, I am a proud, just as much as being a proud gay man, I am a proud Christian. And I have been my whole life. And I don't have a problem saying that. And I did not find, at least here in the Inland Empire, a church where I could be queer, I could be Black, I could be brown, I could be gay, I could be positive, and I could walk into your church and be a Christian man at the same time. And at the time of my diagnosis, I needed that.
Yes.
I needed Jesus just as much as I needed a therapist, just as much as I needed antiretroviral therapy. I needed all three, and I needed all three simultaneously.
Yes.
So we need to begin to think critically about when we approach our services, we are approaching an entire person.
Yes.
Who is a whole person
right.
with a lot of things that they bring in.
Yes.
And that doesn't mean you are Superman. That doesn't mean you're Superman and you do it all. You know, you might just do a piece of it. But you have to develop a strategy in which you provide a pathway for that individual to access all of the services that they need. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're providing it. It means that you are the facilitator of this access. And that doesn't necessarily mean it means it strays you from your core competency or deviates you from your mission. But we got to think that way. That's got to be our approach. It's got to be from an intersectional lens. As Audre Lorde says. That's Audre Lorde, as Audre Lorde reference, right? So we have to be intersectional in our approach.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Yes. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yes. Yes.
As a holistic organization, have you been able to, at least on a small scale, bridge the gap between the African American community and the Latino community? Because you mentioned earlier that you've experienced the conflict. There are a lot of drama between those two communities. So have you been able to bridge that gap?
No, it's a good question. That's a good question. I would say that the community has begun to do that on its own. And I'm going to tell you why. My generation, I think I fall right in between millennial and then like a little older. Like I'm going to be 30. So I'm a little like, right? I'm not like all the way millennial. Like I'm not all the way millennial. I'm just like a little bit, but the millennial generation is almost consciously unconscious of their intersectionality. They are able to find similarities with each other, and they overlook distinctions that many of us made back in the day. So back in the day, I made a distinction between Black and brown. Like I was like, okay, I know you Black and I know you brown, and I know I am both, and I don't know where I go, right? That consciousness is at the forefront of my mind. But a lot of young people say, well, I'm gay and he's gay. Oh, but I'm white and they're Black. Oh, well, we're not having that conversation. We're talking about the fact that we're gay. So we are talking about our intersection. We're not having this conversation about our distinctions. We're having a conversation about how we are the same. We are naturally gravitating towards one another on how we are similar. So, to answer your question specifically on Black and brown, within the LGBT community, there's a very large, what we call POC movement, people of color. Okay. So for instance, here in California, there's an annual conference that happens called the QPOC conference. It's huge. It's an enormous conference, and it's queer people of color. And they don't say I'm Black, I'm brown, and this is the Black conference and this is the brown conference. They're like, we are going to the QPOC conference and we are all people of color. And there will be Asian Americans there. There will be those from the indigenous communities there. There will be Black people there. There will be brown people there. There will be white, Black, biracial people there. And we say, yeah, you're white, but you're also half Black. And so you experience the of color diaspora just as much as we do. And so people are finding their similarities on their own. Now, having said that, there is something that I'm starting to notice that's happening as well, is that there is this call for, the term nationhood, well, like a cultural hood. where people actually want to reconnect with their distinctions. People want to reconnect with their African diaspora. So I want to actually have a conversation about my African diaspora and how I am Black and my Blackness. And that's how you saw the emergence of Black Lives Matter, not people of color lives matter, Black Lives Matter, because now we're starting to re-engage in a conversation on that. Now, what is very interesting about millennials, because of how social media has influenced them, millennials process and move through trends and fads at a much faster rate than we do. You know, while I saw a lot of racial violence in the late 1990s and in the early 2000s, we're moving through those seasonal cycles now almost annually. Now it's like, okay, this year it's one thing and next year it's going to be another, and then the next year it's going to be a whole other thing. Things are moving very quickly. What I will say to you, though, and I'm going to quote a young boy from Crenshaw High School that told me this when I did a youth roundtable discussion for AIDS Healthcare Foundation. He says, "We change our opinions, our behaviors, and thoughts at a click of a button, and you need to lean in and keep up." That's exactly what he said. And I lived for that statement. I was like, yes, 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 yes. You know, like, I love when people affirm who they are, you know, and he says, we change our behaviors, our opinions, and our thoughts at a click of a button. And you need to just lean in and keep up. And one thing that I tell a lot of people when I do a workshop is I say, lean into the discomfort of that. You know, because I'll be honest with you, Danette, I literally have to do a reevaluation on my organization's cultural competency every 6 months. Every 6 months, we sit down and say, okay, what's happening in culture today? How is what we were saying 6 months ago now outdated? You know, like queer. It's interesting. I found in myself that more and more I refer to myself as queer. But I come from a generation in which we didn't say that. Queer was a very bad word, and that was a very hurtful word. But it is now a reclaimed word. I now say queer, and I actually call myself queer more and more now. And I like the fluidity of that. I like being able to say that I change and I move and I adapt and I shift and, you know, I'm moving. And I don't want you to peg me as anything in particular. Like, I'm just gonna, today I might be one thing and tomorrow I might be another. And that's the same thing with Black and brown people, is that they shift in how they affirm their distinctions and similarities. They change in how they see themselves. And, you know, one minute I'm Black, and that's the identity I'm showing up in. But tomorrow we might have a conversation about me being poor. And now we want to have a conversation about poverty in America, and we can create camaraderie and unity and fellowship around this idea of eradicating poverty in America. And so I think there is no really rule of thumb on how to approach that. I think you just literally have to adapt with community. Just roll with it. And as soon as you learn something different, you change with it. And you just, as soon as you hear something different, flow with that too. And it's a dance that you do with community. And I'll be honest with you, that's almost in every sector, not just in racial justice or reproductive health, you know, for women. You know, some women believe that, you know, hypersexuality is considered a reclamation of their identity. Some women believe the opposite. They believe conservatism is a reclamation of their identity. Some women believe a little bit of both. Some women change. Sometimes the messaging shifts on what is considered women empowerment. It changes. I hear women all the time that have different opinions. I mean, if you guys may have heard of, oh God, what's her name? Her campaign is, she does the slut walk. It's really big. The slut walk is huge. It's really large. It's a famous celebrity. She's very controversial. I can't remember her name. But she does something called the slut walk. If you Google it, it'll come up. And it's about women reclaiming words, phrases, and assumptions that people displace onto women, calling them sluts. If a woman does this, she's a slut. If she does that, she's a slut. Everything a woman does just slut shames her. It doesn't matter what she does. You know, she can do anything and there's something wrong about it. So she does something called the slut walk. I know a lot of women's rights groups who are very much against that. Like, they think that she is perpetuating slut shaming of women simply by using the word. it's just different opinions and different thoughts and perspectives and backgrounds. And sometimes they find intersection in their similarities, and sometimes they diverge and they have very different opinions. And you kind of just have to lean into that. And it's been a challenge for me because when I speak on a national stage with, 5,000 people, there are 5,000 different lived experiences in that room. And there will be one person that I will piss off by saying one thing in the wrong way, one time in the wrong sentence, and I put the wrong comma in the wrong place. And honestly, you know what I do? I lean into that. And when people come up to me and they say that offended me, I go, well, let's talk about, let's sit down, let's get some coffee. And I want to talk to you about that. And I tell them, I said, this is where I'm coming from. And I say, let me adapt. I'm going to integrate what you just said now into my new lexicon and into my vocabulary and how I language and articulate myself. And as social justice and social impact leaders, we have to humble ourselves to that. You got to humble yourselves to, you might be wrong, and your own lived experience may be invalid for someone else. So you, as a Black woman living in, where do you live, Danette?
California.
Oh, where are you in California?
In Vacaville.
Where is that at?
It's near, I guess, in the middle of Sacramento.
Oh, you're up there. You're in NorCal. You're in the Bay. Okay. I'm in Oakland all the time, so that's as close as I go. I go to Oakland a lot. But so you as a Northern California Black woman, there may be another Northern California Black woman who has absolutely different opinions, and she may say what you believe about race, about womanhood, about identity. I don't believe in that. And in fact, your beliefs offend me. Like what? Like my identity offends you? And I find that quite a bit. But to be honest with you, when I've encountered that, I actually love it. It actually makes me smile because I love the diversity within diversity itself, right? And you just gotta lean into that. I know that's a long answer. I love talking and having conversation with people, so.
Thank you.
Well, this has been really great. Thank you so much, Gabriel. This has been amazing. There's all these little.
Hey, did we do good? We all did good, man. Everybody.
And I love too that you were talking about how you have to respond quickly to what's going and changing around you. That's something our president always says. As soon as something is the best practice, it's outdated, and you need to rescan and change what you're doing. So, well, thank you so much. For me, this has been awesome. So, if anybody else would like to comment before we wrap up, we do need to. We have to watch the time so we don't get cut off because the meeting will stop at a certain point. So I just want to make sure that everyone has a chance to say any final comments. But thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And I think one of the things that we're going to do is post this to all of the students, and I know that they will enjoy it very much. So thank you very, very much, Gabriel.
Thank you, Anita, for inviting me. It was a pleasure.
All right. So over and out.
Over and out.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.